In life, some people become more and more boisterous, wanting to prove their abilities, while others, the more valuable they are, the quieter and more humble they become. The ancients said, "A truly great person doesn't show off. A virtuous person doesn't boast." A short saying, but containing profound wisdom about judging people and cultivating oneself. There are truly great things that don't need to be displayed. There are truly valuable qualities that don't need to be spoken of for recognition. In today's video, we will explore why those with greater inner strength tend to be less ostentatious, and why true virtue always goes hand in hand with humility. If you enjoy profound life lessons that help you understand people better and live more deeply, subscribe to the Simple Philosophy channel to follow our meaningful content. In an era where everyone is easily swept up in self-expression, wanting to be seen, recognized, and noticed, an ancient saying still holds true as a profound reminder: a truly wise person does not reveal their true nature. A virtuous person does not boast. This is not just a saying about living humbly, but also a very deep philosophy about the true value of a person. At first glance, many might interpret this saying as overly secretive or reclusive, suggesting that talented people should hide themselves, and good people shouldn't be known by anyone. However, if understood correctly, the ancients' meaning isn't about withdrawing into oneself or denying one's own value. The saying is about something much deeper. Truly valuable people don't need to show off to prove their worth. A truly wise person is someone with profound intelligence, courage, and inner strength. They are not only knowledgeable, but also possess deep understanding, foresight, and unwavering resilience in the face of life's vicissitudes. A truly wise person doesn't necessarily have to be famous, powerful, or of high status. Some live very ordinary, simple lives, yet their thinking is brilliant. Their perspective on life is profound, and their approach to problems is calm and mature. They are not easily swept away by external noise, do not react impulsively to minor conflicts, and do not live solely to prove themselves superior to others. Virtuous people are those who are moral, live kindly, and are considerate of others. They're the kind of people you feel comfortable around, safe, and respected. They don't need to talk much about their kindness, constantly preach morality, or show off their beautiful lives. Their way of treating others, keeping their promises, being considerate and moderate, speak volumes about their character. Not showing off or boasting doesn't mean hiding or living a secluded life. This is a very important point. Some people misunderstand humility as denying one's own abilities, not daring to show what one has, or constantly belittling oneself in front of others. That's not the spirit of this saying. Not showing off here means not needing to flaunt one's value to seek external recognition. It means a person knows who they are and what they have, but doesn't live in a mindset of constantly having to prove it. There's a huge difference between truly valuable people and those who are always trying to make others see them as valuable. The former focus on living right, doing good, and maintaining inner depth. The latter are often preoccupied with how to gain recognition, praise, or admiration from others. One builds the foundation, the other only cares about the branches. And over time, that difference becomes very apparent. Why are truly valuable people usually less talkative? Because those with true inner strength don't need to prove themselves too much. This is easy to observe if you look long enough. The more truly skilled a person is, the less they talk about themselves. The more profound a person is, the less they rush to show off their knowledge. The more truly capable a person is, the less they react in a competitive way, focusing on every word, every glance, or every small act of recognition. The reason is simple. When a person truly possesses inner strength, they are no longer overly dependent on how others perceive them to feel valued, and they don't need to constantly show off to feel secure about themselves. They don't live for the opinions of the crowd, and therefore aren't overly controlled by the need for attention. Conversely, the more insecure a person is, the more likely they are to be outwardly boisterous. When their inner selves are unstable, people easily seek validation from others. They want praise to feel good enough, attention to feel important, and admiration to fill the void of insecurity. Therefore, they easily fall into a state of constantly needing to show off, to demonstrate to others how capable, clever, different, or admirable they are. This doesn't mean all self-expression is bad. People still need to communicate, showcase their abilities, and be present at the right time in their work and lives. The issue isn't about whether or not to express oneself, but about the underlying motivation. If self-expression is for contributing, working, connecting, and creating value, that's normal. But if self-expression is only to feed one's ego and constantly seek admiration, then the more outwardly flamboyant one is, the emptier one often appears inside. Truly valuable people understand that their value is reflected in their way of life, their work, and their interpersonal relationships. This is a very profound point, because the most enduring quality in a person rarely lies in what they say about themselves, but in the impression they leave on others after sufficient interaction. A person can talk a lot about how talented they are, how ethical they are, and how much experience they have. But if in their daily lives they are irresponsible, tactless, hot-tempered, prone to belittling others, or always put their ego first, then all those words will sooner or later be revealed as untrue. Conversely, there are people who don't talk much about themselves, but their work inspires confidence, their promises earn trust, and their behavior makes others feel respected. These are people who don't need to introduce themselves excessively, because their way of life speaks volumes. They understand that lasting success doesn't lie in fleeting attention, but in living a meaningful life and earning genuine respect from others. This is a very thought-provoking lesson in today's world, as many people confuse prominence with value. Prominence can come quickly, but it can also disappear just as quickly. An image, a statement, a well-timed appearance can bring someone attention. But to earn genuine respect, one must go through a very different process. It's a process of living consistently, living kindly, living meaningfully, and not betraying true values when no one is watching. Those who receive a lot of attention aren't necessarily the ones who are trusted in the long run. Those who speak well aren't necessarily those who live virtuous lives. Those with a beautiful image don't necessarily possess inner strength. Only through time, through encounters, through self-interest, and through challenges does true value gradually emerge. And that's when we understand why the ancients valued people who didn't need to show off but still commanded respect. Ultimately, the saying, "Great minds don't show off, virtuous people don't boast," isn't about living a dull life. On the contrary, it's about focusing on building inner strength instead of being overly concerned with outward appearances. When wisdom is deep enough, it will manifest in one's perspective and way of life. When morality is strong enough, it will show in one's conduct and character. Truly valuable things don't need to be shouted for others to believe. They carry their own weight. Perhaps the greatest beauty of this type of person is that they make others feel at ease, not overwhelmed. In their presence, one doesn't feel pressured by ostentation, but rather uplifted by their composure. They don't impress with what they show off, but with what they keep to themselves. They don't inspire respect for their flashy appearance, but for the quiet depth of their inner strength and character. And perhaps that is also one of the most beautiful destinations on the journey of being human. Not to become the loudest, the most prominent, or the most admired person, but to become a person profound enough not to need to show off, strong enough not to need to prove anything, and kind enough for their value to naturally shine through their daily lives. There's a subtle yet profound rule in life. The emptier something is, the louder it tends to be. The fuller something is, the quieter it becomes. This isn't just a humorous saying or an interesting analogy, but a very insightful observation about human psychology. Once you've lived long enough and interacted with enough different kinds of people, you'll find this saying to be truly thought-provoking. The ancients often used very simple imagery to describe very significant things. An empty vase, when struck together, makes a louder noise. A full vase, on the other hand, is heavier, more stable, and makes less noise. The same is true for people. When there's a lot of emptiness inside, much insecurity, many deficiencies, or an uncultivated ego, people tend to make a lot of noise. This noise isn't just words. It also includes attitude, expression, display, and the need for attention. This is a very common pattern in life. People who lack self-confidence tend to talk a lot about themselves, enjoy compliments, and easily show off. This may sound counterintuitive, as many people believe that those who talk a lot about themselves are very confident. But in reality, in many cases, this is a sign of inner insecurity. When a person doesn't truly believe in their own worth, they easily seek external validation. They want praise to feel good enough. They want recognition to feel valued. They want attention to avoid being overlooked. And as this need grows, people easily fall into a state of constant self-expression. They talk a lot about their achievements. They emphasize what they know. They easily exaggerate their experiences. They easily put themselves at the center of the conversation. They easily become uncomfortable if others don't perceive them as they desire. In reality, beneath those outward appearances, there's often not strength, but a void that needs filling. A person who is truly confident in their worth doesn't always need others to remind them. They don't live in a state of constantly having to affirm themselves. Therefore, they are lighter, less strained, and less noisy. Conversely, truly resilient people are usually calmer because they don't need the attention of others to fill an inner void. This is a very valuable quality of people with inner strength. They are not cold or distant. They still communicate, work, share, and connect. But they are not driven by the need to impress others. Inner strength often possesses a unique kind of composure. They don't need to interrupt to prove they're right. They don't need to show off their knowledge in every conversation. They don't need to turn every situation into a platform to prove themselves. They are strong enough to understand that true value doesn't lie in who speaks louder, who stands out more, or who gets more attention in a moment. True value lies in the depth that time and experience will gradually reveal. That's why truly capable people tend to be less ostentatious. It's not because they have nothing to say, but because they don't need words to highlight themselves. They understand that while words may impress others initially, only their way of life, their work, and their interpersonal skills will earn them lasting respect. Interestingly, in life, many people who initially make a strong impression aren't the ones who leave the deepest impression. Some people appear very prominent, speak eloquently, talk a lot about themselves, and immediately attract attention. But after spending enough time with them, people begin to see their superficiality, impulsiveness, competitiveness, or inner instability. Conversely, there are people who start out very ordinary, even quiet and reserved, not trying to attract attention. But the longer you interact with them, the more you work with them, and the more real-life situations you encounter, the more you realize their depth and trustworthiness. The story of a highly skilled yet humble person is a clear example of this. In real life, everyone has encountered this type of person. They may be very good at their job, possess extensive knowledge, handle problems well, have foresight, and be truly capable. But when interacting with them, they are incredibly gentle and down-earth. They don't enter a conversation with the mindset of having to show off how good they are. They don't use their achievements as a way to create pressure or distance. They don't speak to others with a condescending attitude. On the contrary, they usually make the person they're talking to feel comfortable, respected, and listened to. They don't boast about their achievements. They don't look down on others, and they always know how to listen. These are three beautiful signs of a truly profound person. It's not boasting about achievements doesn't mean denying what they've accomplished. Rather, it means they understand that achievements are something to live by, not something to be repeatedly displayed to nourish their ego. They don't look down on others because they understand that everyone has their own journey, limitations, and value. Truly great people don't need to make others seem smaller to feel greater. They always know how to listen because they understand that true understanding doesn't close people off, but opens them up. It is precisely this humility that earns even greater respect. This is strange yet true. The more someone tries to impress others, the harder it is to earn genuine respect. Conversely, those who don't try to project an image of respect, but live with sufficient depth, kindness, and integrity naturally command much more respect. Humility here doesn't mean pretending to be inferior or belittling oneself. True humility is knowing what you have, but not needing to use it to compete or show off. It's being skilled enough not to constantly prove yourself. It's understanding enough not to feel the need to dominate. It's being insightful enough to continue learning even after you've come a long way. This is a very important lesson in the journey of becoming a person. Many young people today are caught in an invisible pressure to show off as much as possible to be noticed. They feel they must prove they are different, outstanding, talented, and valuable. But if they are not careful, they will gradually equate value with the level of attention they receive. And that is a very tiring trap. Because attention is always short-lived, while true value takes time to build. Wise people aren't overly concerned with how to impress others. They're more concerned with becoming truly deeper, better, and stronger. They understand that if their inner selves are full, their outward appearance will naturally carry weight. There's no need to overemphasize, overtalk, or overexert oneself. Just live authentically, with enough kindness and depth, and sooner or later others will sense it. Ultimately, the saying, the emptier, the louder the noise. The fuller the heart. The quieter the silence isn't meant to criticize anyone, but rather to remind each person to look inward. Perhaps sometimes we're talking too much because our inner strength isn't enough. Perhaps sometimes we're so desperate for validation that we've lost our spontaneity. Perhaps sometimes we're trying to impress instead of quietly building our inner strength. If we realize this, we don't need to blame ourselves. We just need to start nurturing our inner fullness. Fullness with genuine understanding. Fullness with genuine experience. Fullness with genuine kindness. Fullness with discipline, with strength of character, and with peace of mind. When our inner selves are fuller, we naturally become less noisy. Not because we've run out of things to say, but because we no longer need to use noise to prove ourselves. And perhaps that is the profound beauty of a mature person. Not the most talkative, the most prominent, or the one who attracts the most attention. Rather, it is the person who is mature enough to know when to be silent, steadfast enough not to need to show off, and humble enough to earn respect for their simplicity as they go further. In life, there's something that easily misleads people. Outward noise often creates a stronger impression than inner depth. Those who talk a lot, show off a lot, and appear frequently tend to attract more attention. Meanwhile, those who are quieter, more reserved, and less ostentatious are sometimes seen as ordinary or unremarkable. But if you observe life long enough, you'll realize a truth worth pondering. The more you try to show something to others, the less solid it truly is. The story of the show-off but shallow individual is a very familiar image in modern life. This type of person is not uncommon. They often love to talk about themselves, desperately want to be seen as outstanding, and constantly try to create the feeling that they are superior to others in some aspect. They may talk extensively about what they have done, what they know, their relationships, their achievements, or their experiences. They like to be the center of conversation, enjoy being the center of attention, and like to create the feeling that they are special. At first glance, this type of person might impress others. People are naturally drawn to what is striking and outwardly confident. But the problem is that initial impressions don't always reflect true value. And after just a few truly genuine situations, the outer shell will begin to reveal the underlying flaws. When faced with real difficulties, many show-offs easily reveal their lack of resilience. This is very clear. When things are going smoothly, are easy to control. And within the realm of maintaining a positive image, anyone can speak well and appear confident. But when real pressure arises, when interests are threatened, when facing failure, conflict, loss, or significant responsibility, their true nature begins to emerge. Some people are very good at talking about success, but lose their composure at the first sign of failure. Some people always portray themselves as worldly experts, but become easily offended and hot-tempered at the slightest criticism. Some people love to project an image of integrity but behave petty when their interests are threatened. Some people always appear strong and capable, but the moment a real setback occurs, they immediately panic, blame others, and lose their way. This shows that a flashy exterior doesn't equate to inner strength. This is a very important lesson. In life, we shouldn't judge a person too quickly based solely on how they present themselves. Some people are very good at making an impression, but lack the ability to go the distance. They might attract attention for a short period, but lack the depth to maintain long-term trust and respect. Sometimes, the more something is boasted about, the less solid it truly is. This might sound harsh, but it's very true. When someone constantly has to mention their achievements, it's often not because they are exceptionally talented, but because they aren't yet confident in their own worth and need to repeat it to both convince others and reassure themselves. When someone constantly has to prove that they live a virtuous life, it's often not because they are exceptionally virtuous, but because deep down, they still desperately need to be recognized as a good person. Truly capable individuals don't feel the need to constantly show off. It's not because they lack substance, but because they don't live in a state of constantly having to signal their worth. They are strong enough to understand that time will prove what is true. What has depth will be revealed through experience. What demonstrates resilience will be validated by challenges. From this, we will understand more deeply why true virtue doesn't need to be publicized. This is a very beautiful and important idea in the journey of being human. Because in an era where all good things are easily transformed into images, into content, into something to display, maintaining pure inner kindness is more precious than ever. Virtuous people don't do good deeds for praise. They help others not to boast, and live virtuously, not to build a positive image. This is a significant difference between true virtue and performance virtue. True virtue stems from conscience, character, and the way a person chooses to live, even when no one is watching. Performance virtue, on the other hand, is often linked to the need for recognition, praise, or to be seen as a positive image in the eyes of others. A truly virtuous person doesn't turn kindness into a stage. They help because they feel they should help. They yield because they feel they should yield. They're kind because it's the right way to live, not because they want to gain favor. This doesn't mean that every good deed known to others is fake. The issue isn't whether others know about it or not, but the underlying motivation. If you do good deeds while constantly expecting to be seen, told about, or praised, that kindness is easily diluted by ego. Conversely, truly virtuous people are often very natural. They don't worry too much about whether others acknowledge their kindness. It's not because they're indifferent, but because they understand that doing what's right doesn't always require an audience to be worthwhile. They don't live virtuously as a strategy for image, but as a quality ingrained in their way of thinking and living. The most beautiful aspect of virtue is its quiet yet powerful influence. It's a profound beauty that only those observant enough can recognize. There are people who never speak much about morality, but their behavior inspires those around them to live more honorably. There are people who don't boast about their kindness, but simply by observing how they treat the vulnerable, the elderly, those who serve, or those who cannot benefit them, one can understand who they are. True virtue doesn't need to be shouted to be seen. It manifests in the smallest things. In the way a person keeps a promise, in the way they speak about someone who is absent, in the way they react when they have power, in the way they behave when others are no longer useful to them, in the way they remain kind even when tired, sad, or being treated unpleasantly. Virtuous people don't try to show it off, but others can sense it very clearly. This is strange but true. There are people who never claim to be good, but the longer you interact with them, the more you appreciate them. It's not because they are perfect, but because they possess a warmth, a sense of moderation, trustworthiness, and a kindness that doesn't need to be displayed. That feeling doesn't come from introductions, but from their life energy and how they are present in other people's lives. Being around them, people feel more at ease, lighter, less defensive. It's not because they're trying to please, but because they genuinely know how to be considerate, respectful, and maintain integrity in their daily lives. And that is the greatest power of virtue. It doesn't impose, it doesn't promote, it's not noisy, but it touches deeply. Ultimately, the story of the show-off, but shallow person, and the quiet beauty of the virtuous person are two stark contrasts in life. One strives to create a spotlight for others to see. The other quietly keeps the inner light shining brightly. One wants to be seen immediately. The other doesn't need to be seen, but still leaves a lasting impression. And perhaps as we mature, we understand that what is truly valuable isn't the kind of attention-grabbing behavior that impresses others for a moment. Rather, it's the kind of depth that earns respect the more people interact with you. The more you appreciate it, the closer you are, and the more you value it over time. No need for fanfare. No need for showing off. No need for self-promotion. Just live authentically, with enough kindness and steadfastness, and that very way of life will become the most beautiful introduction to a person. There's a very clear sign of maturity that people recognize the longer they live: humility. When we're young and naive, we often think that maturity means being stronger, more capable, more outstanding, and receiving more recognition from others. But after traveling a few more paths in life, encountering different kinds of people, experiencing more ups and downs, we understand that the deepest sign of maturity often doesn't lie in how well a person expresses themselves, but in how little they need to prove themselves anymore. When we are young and immature, we often want to prove ourselves superior to others. This is a very natural reflex of the ego when it is not yet fully developed. We want to be seen, acknowledged, and appreciated. We want others to know that we are valuable, capable, knowledgeable, have a position, or at least are not inferior. Therefore, the immature stage is often accompanied by a rather strong need for self-expression. Many young people like to assert their point of view in every conversation. They like to speak up to show others how knowledgeable they are. They like to talk about their achievements, experiences, and accomplishments. They like to create the feeling that they are progressing faster, living better lives, or seeing the world more deeply than others. In reality, these behaviors aren't necessarily bad, simply show that deep down, there's still an ego that desperately needs validation. But as we mature, we understand that we don't need to win everyone's eyes. This is a huge inner shift. Because when we are young, we easily live in the feeling that we need to be understood, recognized, and appreciated to feel good. But then life teaches us a very true lesson. No one can completely control how others see them. And the more we try to do that, the more exhausted we become. There will always be people who don't understand you. There will always be people who misjudge you. There will always be people who only see a part of you and then judge your whole character. If you live constantly needing to win everyone's eyes, you'll waste a lot of energy on endless attempts to prove yourself. And ironically, the more you try to prove yourself, the more you realize how inadequate you are. Maturity is when we begin to let go of those needs. Not because we are indifferent or uncaring, but because we understand better that our true value doesn't lie entirely in how others see us. Mature people still know how to listen to feedback and adjust when necessary, but they no longer live overly dependent on external validation. They don't need to be right in everyone's eyes. They only need to live in a way that is true to their conscience and the values they believe in. And it is from here that humility begins to blossom as a beautiful sign of maturity. Humility doesn't diminish a person. It makes them deeper, stronger, and more trustworthy. This is something many people misunderstand. Many still think that humility means stepping back, hiding oneself, not talking about one's possessions, or lowering oneself to appear agreeable. But that's not true humility. True humility is knowing your own strengths and weaknesses, but not using them to compete or compare. It's understanding your own abilities, but not using them as a reason to belittle others. It's being skilled enough not to constantly boast about your abilities. It's being experienced enough not to feel the need to always be in a position of lecturing others. Humble people are not those who have nothing. On the contrary, they are often people who have had enough experience to understand that the more they know, the more they realize how much they still don't know. The further they travel, the broader the world seems. It's the more talented people they meet, the less they want to show off. This realization makes them less noisy, less aggressive, and less inclined to stand out. Humility enriches a person because it opens the possibility of continuous learning. People who always want to prove themselves superior often find it difficult to accept new things because their ego always needs to be in a higher position. But humble people are different. They may be skilled, but they still listen. They may understand, but they still observe. They may have experience, but they are still willing to correct themselves. And it is this that helps them continue to grow even after they have come a long way. Humility also makes people stronger, because those who are no longer overly concerned about how they should appear in the eyes of others tend to live much more lightly. They don't need to strain to maintain an image. They don't need to overreact when their pride is hurt. They don't need to turn every difference into a competition. This strength is not noisy, but it carries significant weight. And humility makes people more trustworthy, because truly profound people don't give off an overwhelming or ostentatious vibe. They make others feel safe, respected, and easy to get along with. This applies to work and relationships as well. The person who earns lasting trust is rarely the loudest speaker, but rather the one who knows how to listen, knows moderation, and isn't egocentric. If we apply this to modern life, the saying a truly wise person doesn't reveal their true nature becomes more thought-provoking than ever. In an era where everyone can easily express themselves on social media, discretion and composure become even more valuable. This is a clear paradox of today's age. Never before have people had so many tools to express themselves. With just a few photos, a few status updates, a few videos, anyone can create a certain image of themselves. That's not inherently bad. Social media is just a tool. It can help connect, share, learn, and spread values. But the problem is that when people start living too much in their need to be seen, noticed, and admired, their ego can easily be pulled away from its true nature. In that space, many people spend too much energy building their image. They meticulously edit every outward appearance, selecting every beautiful moment, every outstanding achievement, every seemingly profound thought to create a very appealing version of themselves in the eyes of others. But sometimes, the more closely we look, the greater the gap we see between what is displayed and what truly lives within. Therefore, discretion and composure become all the more valuable. In a world where everyone can talk a lot about themselves, a person who knows how to be reserved, who lives deeply rather than superficially, who invests in inner strength rather than just an image, will always have a very different kind of appeal. They are not loud, but carry weight. They are not ostentatious, but have depth. They don't need to make a lot of noise to make others feel their value. Not everyone who lives quietly is profound. This needs to be stated fairly. Some are silent because of insecurity. Some are reserved because of fear. Some are less expressive simply because they have nothing obvious to express. Therefore, silence alone is not enough to conclude about a person's depth. But many truly valuable people don't spend too much energy showing off. This is what's important. Because when someone is truly focused on self-improvement, learning, working, living a virtuous life, and building inner strength, they usually don't feel the need to put everything they have on display. They don't live in a mindset of constantly sending out signals for validation. They understand that what is genuine doesn't need to be talked about all the time. What is solid doesn't need to be boasted about all the time. Such people often have a very different kind of presence. They don't overwhelm others with immediate prominence. But the longer you interact with them, the more you work with them, and the more real-life challenges you face, the more respect you find in them. Because their value lies not in what they say about themselves, but in what they uphold through their daily lives. Ultimately, humility is a sign of maturity, not because it makes a person look better in the eyes of others, but because it shows an inner self that is less immature, less strained, and less in need of victory. And the idea that wise people don't reveal their true selves in modern life isn't advice to live a bland life, but rather a reminder to invest more in the genuine inner self rather than focusing solely on the visible outward appearance. Ultimately, what makes a person valuable isn't how much attention they attract, but how much depth, kindness, and steadfastness they retain within themselves after all the hustle and bustle of life. In life, one of the most common mistakes is judging people too quickly. A captivating way of speaking, a neat appearance, a confident demeanor, or a few seemingly insightful remarks can easily win us over, leading us to quickly conclude that this person is valuable. But the more we experience life, the more we understand a very real truth. What is most easily seen is often not the truest thing. To judge people correctly, we must learn to look beyond the surface. Knowing how to judge people not just by their appearance is a crucial skill, because misjudging people can lead to disappointment and misplaced trust. Many hurts in relationships don't stem from people changing too quickly, but from judging them based on shallow standards from the start. Don't just look at how a person speaks, but look at how they act. This is the first and most important principle. In life, words can be prepared, carefully chosen, and beautifully presented. A person can speak eloquently about morality, deeply about loyalty, and correctly about responsibility. But words only show us how they want to be seen, not necessarily who they truly are. To truly understand a person, don't just look at what they say. Observe how they behave when they're not in a situation where they need to impress. Do they keep their word? Do they fulfill their promises? Are their words and actions consistent? A person might speak eloquently about kindness, but be rude to a servant. They might talk a lot about sincerity, but constantly break promises. They might speak beautifully about humility, but always want to have the upper hand in every conversation. When words and actions don't match, what's trustworthy isn't their words. Don't just listen to how they talk about themselves, observe how they treat the vulnerable. This is one of the clearest reflections of a person's character. The way a person treats those who cannot benefit them is often far more genuine than the way they treat those in power or with value. There are people who are very polite to their superiors, very tactful with those they need, but are cold, dismissive, or disrespectful to servants, workers, the elderly, children, or those in lower positions. This is a sign that their kindness is conditional, and conditional kindness is not true virtue. Conversely, a person who knows how to treat the disadvantaged with respect speaks moderately to those who do not benefit them, and maintains respect even when in a higher position, usually has a fairly good character. Because in that case, behavior doesn't stem from self-interest, but from inherent qualities. Observe how they behave when no one is watching. This is where people reveal their truest selves. When others are watching, everyone tends to act a little more virtuously. When under the scrutiny of society, colleagues, family, or the community, people often adjust their behavior to conform. But when no one is observing, when there is nothing to praise or criticize, their true nature is more easily revealed. A person might be very kind in public, but when no one is aware of their actions, can they still uphold what is right? A person might be very proper in front of others, but when faced with choices known only to them, can they still be honest? This is something difficult to see immediately, but with enough observation over time, one will gradually realize it. And another very important thing is to observe how they remain calm in the face of adversity. That's where true character is revealed. When things are going well, anyone can be pleasant. When loved, anyone can be kind. When respected, anyone can be measured. But when misunderstood, rejected, pressured, hurt, or their pride is wounded, how a person reacts will show what they truly carry within. Some people are normally very gentle, but become bitter at the slightest disagreement. Some talk a lot about morality, but readily act unprincipledly when faced with adversity. Some are very humble in success, but blame the whole world when they fail. It is precisely in these moments of adversity that the true and false aspects of a person are revealed. Judging people correctly isn't about making judgments, but about knowing where to place your trust and learning from what's truly valuable. From this, we understand that instead of just trying to judge others correctly, each person also needs to look back at themselves. Because sometimes what we easily recognize in others is something we ourselves possess to some degree. And that's where the second question becomes crucial: how to reduce self-aggrandizement and cultivate true inner strength. The method of self-cultivation to reduce boasting doesn't lie in outwardly appearing humble, but in cultivating inner fulfillment. Because the more a person lacks something, the more easily they want to show it off. The less confident a person is in a certain area, the more easily they want to prove themselves in that area. To reduce boasting, it's not just about restraining one's mouth, but about cultivating inner peace. Practice doing one thing well without needing anyone to know. This is a very profound but also very difficult exercise. Because people naturally tend to want what they do to be seen, to have their efforts recognized, to have their good deeds known to others. That's perfectly natural. But if you always need others to witness your work, your value will gradually become dependent on external opinions. Try doing a good deed without boasting about it. Complete an act of kindness without posting about it. Help someone without expecting thanks. Cultivate a good habit without announcing it to the whole world. When you do this, you are gradually separating your values from the need for recognition. And that is the first step towards inner strength. Learn to remain silent when faced with the need to prove yourself. This is a very important form of discipline. There will be times in your life when you want to explain yourself at length so others understand you better. You want to share more so others know you have value. You want to react immediately so you won't be underestimated. But you don't always need to speak up to protect your image. There are conversations where, if we remain silent, we grow stronger. There are misunderstandings where, if we don't rush to prove them, time will speak for us. There are judgments where if we don't dwell on them too much, they will simply fade away. Practicing silence here isn't about weakness or resignation. It's about learning to distinguish what needs to be said from what isn't worth our energy. Practice letting your self-worth be demonstrated through results, character, and lifestyle, rather than through self-praise. This is the most sustainable path, because self-praise always has its limits. Others may hear it, they may be impressed, but they won't truly believe it for long if they don't see it reflected in how you live. If you are kind, let kindness show through the way you treat others. If you are competent, let it show through the results of your work. If you have depth, let it show through the way you remain calm, through the way you listen, through the way you don't need to talk too much about yourself. What is genuine will always find a way to manifest itself. No need to force it, no need to strain it, no need for excessive self-promotion. This is a very profound way to cultivate inner strength. Inner strength doesn't come from how many people recognize you, but from whether you can still stand firm when no one praises you, whether you can still uphold what is right when no one sees it, and whether you can still live virtuously when no one applauds you. A truly strong person isn't someone who projects the most beautiful image, but someone who can live consistently with their values, even in the quietest moments when no one is watching. Ultimately, learning to see people more deeply is also learning to live more deeply. When we are no longer so easily attracted by appearances, we will be less hasty in trusting, admiring, and following whom. And when we are no longer so preoccupied with making ourselves seem great to others, we will have more time to quietly build a truly valuable person. It's a slower, quieter, less flashy path. But it's also the path that makes people stronger, deeper, and more respectable over the years. And ultimately, perhaps the most beautiful thing isn't about how many people see you, but about becoming someone whose value naturally radiates simply by living authentically. There's something fascinating about life that becomes easier to realize as we mature. It's not always the person with the most possessions who lives the lightest life, nor the person with the most recognition who is at peace. There are people who aren't overly prominent, not overly boisterous, don't constantly strive to prove themselves, yet possess a unique sense of tranquility. Being around them makes others feel comfortable. Observing their way of life, one senses a quietness and stability not everyone has. And if you look deeper, you'll find a common thread. They are often virtuous and humble individuals. Why is it that the more virtuous a person is, the more easily they find peace? This question touches upon a very deep aspect of human spirituality. Peace isn't something that comes solely from external circumstances. Some people have everything they need, yet their hearts are still turbulent. Others may not possess many things, but their hearts are light. What makes the difference isn't just what a person has, but how they live with themselves. When we stop worrying so much about what others think, we feel lighter. This is a huge step towards maturity. Much of life's invisible stress doesn't come directly from work or circumstances, but from constantly living under the scrutiny of others. We worry about being judged, whether people think we're good enough, whether we're inferior to anyone, and whether our image is positive in everyone's eyes. When you live like that for too long, it's easy to get tired without understanding why. Because every day, we're not only living our own lives, but also carrying the burden of a life in the minds of others. We're not just working, but silently wondering what people think of how we do things. We're not just living, but constantly adjusting ourselves to appear appropriate, valuable, and not be underestimated. But virtuous people often gradually break free from that cycle. Not because they are indifferent or uncaring towards others, but because they have come to understand more deeply what truly matters. They know that it's impossible to please everyone. It's impossible to control every perspective. It's impossible to spend their entire lives building a perfect image in the eyes of the world. And when they let go of those needs, their hearts begin to lighten. When you no longer have to constantly show off, your mind becomes less tired. This is a very true fact, but many people overlook it. Excessive self-expression is a huge drain on energy. We have to think about what to say to make others think we're great, what to do to make others think we're skilled, and how to live to get attention, recognition, and respect. Initially, it might bring a feeling of exhilaration, but if it continues, it will become a silent pressure. The more one tries to maintain an image, the more unnatural one becomes. The more one wants to always look good, the harder it is to allow oneself to be truly vulnerable. The more one desires to be seen positively, the more afraid one is of revealing imperfections. And so, the mind remains constantly strained. Virtuous and humble people often possess a unique kind of peace because they live authentically rather than seeking recognition. This is the core principle. Peace doesn't come from a life without turmoil, but from a lack of internal conflict. Virtuous people don't expend excessive energy on role-playing. They don't constantly need to appear brilliant, outstanding, or seek everyone's approval. They live closer to their true selves. They say what they know and are willing to learn what they don't. They are valuable but don't need to show off. They do good but aren't overly concerned about whether others see it or not. It is this authenticity and simplicity that prevents them from being torn between image and essence. And when they no longer live in that separation, their hearts naturally find much more peace. A person who lives according to their conscience usually sleeps better than someone who lives by appearances. A person who is sensible and content is usually lighter than someone who is always trying to win. A virtuous person doesn't need to compete too much with the world, because they understand that what is most valuable is not the feeling of winning against others, but the feeling of not losing to themselves. From this we can see something very important more clearly. Many people still think that to live humbly, one must humble oneself, become smaller, or think of oneself as having nothing. But that is a fairly common misunderstanding. To live truly humbly, one must first understand clearly what humility is and how it differs from self-doubt. Distinguishing humility from inferiority complex is crucial, because a misunderstanding can easily lead people to either live ostentatiously or unnecessarily diminish themselves. Neither is true maturity. Humility doesn't mean denying one's own worth. This is the first thing to affirm. A humble person isn't someone who constantly says they're not good, don't know, or have nothing worth mentioning. Nor are they someone who deliberately tries to appear less than they actually are, just to be praised as cute or modest. That's just a form of outward expression, sometimes even a more subtle way of seeking validation. True humility is knowing what you have, but not using it to elevate yourself or put others down. It's a state of profound inner balance. A humble person knows their abilities, but doesn't use them as a tool to dominate. They know their achievements, but don't turn them into reasons to look down on others. They know their value, but don't use that value to create distance or a sense of superiority. In other words, humility is a steadfastness without ostentation. It's being clear about oneself, but not being carried away by ego. It's not needing to elevate oneself by making others seem insignificant. Such people are usually very pleasant. They don't give off feelings of inferiority, but neither do they give off feelings of arrogance. They're present naturally, moderately, and with weight. Insecurity is different. Insecurity is feeling inadequate, while humility is knowing you have enough, but not needing to show off. This is a very important boundary. People with low self-esteem often live with the feeling that they are not as good as others. They easily doubt their own worth, are afraid of being judged, are reluctant to appear in public, and sometimes even withdraw into themselves to avoid attention or hurt. People with low self-esteem may appear humble on the surface because they tend to be less boastful, less talkative, or dislike public speaking. However, their underlying motivations are quite different. Humble people are silent because they don't need to prove themselves. People with low self-esteem are silent because they fear they aren't good enough. Humble people don't show off because they are content with their own worth. People with low self-esteem don't show off because they don't yet believe they are worthful. This is why some people appear very gentle and quiet, but inside they are full of anxiety and insecurity. Conversely, some people are very strong and capable, but live extremely simple lives and dislike noise. They may look similar on the outside, but their inner selves are completely different. The most beautiful thing is that people can go from self-doubt to humility if they know how to cultivate it properly. When we begin to understand our own value without needing to flaunt it, we are gradually entering the realm of maturity. When we no longer need to humble ourselves to be accepted, but also don't need to elevate ourselves to be recognized, we begin to touch upon a very healthy form of self-confidence. It's quiet self-confidence. Self-confidence that doesn't need a stage. Self-confidence that is quiet enough to be. Ultimately, the more virtuous a person is, the more peaceful they find life. Not because their lives are without storms, but because they create fewer storms within themselves. They aren't overly preoccupied with seeking recognition. They aren't overly concerned with maintaining an image. They aren't caught up in the need to compete or win. They know who they are, what's worth holding on to, and what's worth letting go of. And it is this clarity that brings them peace. Humility, if understood correctly, is not a way of life that diminishes one's worth. Rather, it is a way of life that helps one become deeper. It doesn't diminish a person's value, but rather strengthens and makes that value more solid and trustworthy. Because ultimately, what makes a person truly valuable is not how many people look up to them, but that after all, they maintain an inner peace that isn't overly noisy, a character that doesn't need to be shown off, and a serenity that doesn't need to be proven. In an era where anyone can appear, anyone can talk about themselves, and anyone can create a stunning image in just a few minutes, people are increasingly confused between prominence and true value. Many believe that to be respected, one must impress, show off, and demonstrate their abilities. But if we look deeply and carefully enough into life, we will see something very thought-provoking. What truly sets a person apart is often not their loudness, but the depth they possess. The practical lesson for the audience lies precisely in this point. In today's life, sometimes what truly sets a person apart isn't how well they speak, but how deeply they live. This is a crucial lesson, especially in an era where presentation skills are sometimes valued more than a person's true depth. Speaking well is a skill. Good communication, expressiveness, and the ability to convey one's thoughts are valuable. But speaking well doesn't always equate to living right. Some people are very skilled at using words to make an impression. It's very adept at making others think they understand life and people, that they live deeply and beautifully. But after spending enough time with them, working with them genuinely, or witnessing their experiences through some real-life challenges, one will begin to see their true nature more clearly. Ultimately, words are the easiest thing to create. It's the way of life that's difficult to fake consistently. A person can prepare very carefully for what they say, but it's very difficult to constantly prepare for how they react in adversity, how they behave when no one is watching, how they treat those who don't benefit them, or how they maintain their integrity when they have power. Therefore, if you want lasting respect, stop trying so hard to impress and spend more time cultivating inner strength, character, and kindness. This is a very practical reminder, not only beautiful from a moral standpoint, but also extremely true in life. Many people devote a great deal of energy to making an impression. They refine their appearance, invest in how they are perceived, and strive for each presence to create some kind of impact on others. This isn't entirely wrong. Everyone wants to be seen favorably. But if you spend too much energy on the surface while neglecting the inner core, you'll easily fall into a state of exhaustion. Because making an impression is a never-ending game. Today you grab attention with one thing. Tomorrow you need something else to keep that attention. Today you're praised for one image. Tomorrow, you have to work hard to maintain that image. The more you live to be seen, the harder it is to live authentically. The more dependent you are on external opinions, the easier it is to lose your inner strength. Meanwhile, cultivating inner strength is a much quieter, but more sustainable path. Inner strength isn't about how many people admire you, but about whether you can still stand firm when no one applauds. Whether you can still maintain your kindness when no one praises you, and whether you can still live up to your values when no one sees you. People with inner strength don't need to talk much about themselves. They let their results speak for themselves. They let their way of life speak for themselves. They let time validate them. This doesn't slow them down. On the contrary, it takes them further, because lasting respect doesn't come from immediate impressions, but from a sense of trust built up over the years. The character is something that needs to be nurtured quietly in the same way. Character isn't something we talk about ourselves, but something others perceive as they pass through our lives. It lies in how you keep your promises, in how you speak about those who are absent, in how you behave when there's nothing left to gain, in how you confront your own mistakes, in how you don't let success make you arrogant and failure make you petty. And so is kindness. Kindness isn't just a few pretty gestures for others to see. True kindness is a consistent way of life. It's how you talk when you're tired. It's how you treat the vulnerable. It's how you don't hurt others with your words just because you're unhappy. It's how you remain reasonable and restrained, even when you're most likely to lose your temper. These things aren't flashy. They don't create a strong immediate impact. But it's these seemingly small things that determine whether a person is worthy of respect. From this practical lesson, we will gain a deeper understanding of the meaning of the saying, "A truly wise person doesn't reveal their true nature, and a virtuous person doesn't boast." This is not just a wise saying from the ancients, but a profound reminder of how people should live if they want to go the distance, while maintaining their dignity. A truly wise person doesn't show off their abilities, and a virtuous person doesn't boast. This is a profound reminder that true value doesn't need fanfare. This is something that becomes truer the longer one lives. What is genuine doesn't need shouting. What has depth doesn't need constant display. A truly intelligent person doesn't need to turn every conversation into a show of their knowledge. A truly capable person doesn't need to turn differences into a competition of superiority. A truly virtuous person doesn't need to turn their kindness into a display of their abilities. Truly talented people don't need to prove themselves much. They understand that if they are truly valuable, it will eventually show itself. Not through self-promotion, but through their work ethic, their behavior, their composure, and their consistent way of life. Truly talented people aren't impatient for immediate recognition. They're confident enough to accept that some values take time to become apparent. Truly virtuous people don't need to show off, because true virtue doesn't thrive in the spotlight. Virtuous people don't do good just to be praised. They don't live virtuously just to be called virtuous. They do what is right because their conscience dictates it. They behave beautifully because it's an inner foundation, not an outward strategy. The most beautiful thing is that those who don't try to show off often leave a deeper impact. They don't create an initial impression of being overwhelming, but the longer you interact with them, the more you respect them.
And the more you work with them,
The more you trust them, more challenges they face, the more you appreciate them. Because what they carry with them is not a fleeting brilliance, but the enduring radiance of genuine quality. The longer we live, the more we realize that the most valuable thing is not attention, but respect for our true qualities. This is perhaps the deepest conclusion of this entire journey. When we are young, we easily confuse attention with value. We easily think that being seen often, mentioned often, and praised often means we are living the right way. But then time will teach us that attention can be very fleeting. Today people pay attention to you, tomorrow they may have forgotten. Today you make a strong impression, but if you are not deep enough inside, that impression is unlikely to last long. Only respect lasts longer. But respect cannot be forced, cannot be begged for. It cannot be created through a few displays. Respect only comes when a person is genuine enough, kind enough, moderate enough, steadfast enough for others to gradually realize that there is something worthy of respect in them. And that's the most beautiful kind of value. There's no fuss, no need for publicity, no need for a stage. Just live authentically, live deeply, and live with roots. Then over time, that very way of life will become the strongest voice about who you are. If today you are living in a world filled with too much noise, too much comparison, and too much pressure to stand out, remember that you don't need to be the loudest person to be valuable. You just need to become more authentic, more profound, and kinder each day. Because ultimately what makes a person shine brightest is not the gaze of the crowd, but the qualities beautiful enough to endure through time and retain their value.